Hey everyone, it's Charlene. Today I'm going to share with you 3 different ways to use your stenciled images, and we're going to be using some of the brand new products from Altenew. So let's jump right in. I'm starting out here with the Midnight Moths stamps and dies. These are really fun because you can dress them up like I'm going to with some really bright colors, or you can tone them down with darker colors, which is great for masculine cards. So we're going to start here by getting some beautiful glitter cardstock. This is new from Altenew. It is their Shimmering Shore glitter cardstock. There's also a couple of other packs available over on the Altenew website. So I'm going to use the Midnight Moth dies, and I'm going to cut out 3 of these moth outlines, and I'm going to cut them from the glitter cardstock. Now this cardstock doesn't shed any glitter, which is really nice, and it has a really nice sparkle to it. So you can even see here on camera, it's just a really nice sparkly paper. Next, I'm going to take a piece of acetate and I'm putting it here in my stamp wheel, and I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool. I'm going to make sure to get the acetate really nice and covered, and this acetate is rated for heat embossing. So you're going to want to use an acetate that is rated for heat embossing, just because otherwise it's going to melt on you and it's not going to work at all. So I've got my 3 moth stamps, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp these out now with some clear embossing ink. You can see where I'm going here with this. I'm going to heat emboss the moths onto the acetate. And this is going to go over the top of the glitter cardstock. So you're going to have the beautiful melted embossing powder on the top of the acetate, but then underneath you're going to have the glitter cardstock, which is going to make them so super nice and sparkly. So this is a really fun way to use your stamps and create a bunch of sparkly color without actually having to spend a bunch of time coloring in the stamps. So you can see I've added my clear embossing ink, and I'm just making sure I get a really nice good impression on the acetate. Want to make sure all of those lines from the stamps, because the stamps are pretty detailed, I want to make sure they all transfer onto the acetate. Once I'm done, I'm going to use a little tool in order to peel the acetate up off my stamp wheel. Now, if you were using something that doesn't have a sticky mat in it, then you won't have to do this step. But all I'm doing is I'm going to peel up 2 of the corners, and then I'm going to slowly peel the acetate off of the stamp wheel. And I'm being very careful not to touch any of the stamped images that I've already stamped. Next, I'm going to go ahead and use some white embossing powder. I'm just going to sprinkle it right over the acetate. Make sure to get a really nice coating on there and hit all of the different spots of the moths. Embossing powder does tend to stick to acetate, which is why it's really important to make sure you get a good amount of anti-static powder down before you do your stamping. Something else that also works well is a dryer sheet, so you could try that as well. I actually normally use a dryer sheet, but I didn't think to use one for this particular card. So I have a little bit more embossing powder sticking to my acetate than I normally would. But all you have to do is come in with a dry brush and brush off any of the excess embossing powder that's still on your acetate. And in fact, I'm going to come in here with my anti-static powder tool, and I am going to brush off the back of the acetate to make sure that none of that powder is still remaining there, because anything that's on the back of your acetate will melt as well when you're hitting it with your heat tool. So once I have all of the excess embossing powder removed from the acetate, I can go ahead and come in with my heat gun and melt all of that beautiful embossing powder on the acetate. You do want to move fairly quickly, especially because you're working with acetate, even though it's rated for heat embossing. If you hold that heat gun in one place for too long, it will start to melt and warp your acetate. Once I'm done, I can go ahead and use those coordinating dies, and I can die cut out all of our gorgeous moths. Now there are two different ways you can attach your embossed acetate to your glitter cardstock. You can use liquid glue, which is what I'm doing here, and I'm just dotting here and there in the areas where I know it's not going to show up very much. The other way you can do it is with double-sided tape, and I like to use adhesive sheets so that way it can cover the entire space behind the acetate so there's no noticeable difference. Hopefully that makes sense. So here is a little tip for you when it comes to embossing with white embossing powder. Keep a white gel pen around. This is a really great way to fill in any little spots that might get missed when you are heat embossing with white. There were a couple of spots here and there that I needed to fix on my little moths, and it worked perfectly. So now that we have our elements done, let's get to the stenciling. I'm going to be using the Whimsy Motif stencil. There's a couple of different layers to this stencil, which makes it really easy to add shading to your florals. For this first card, we're going to be using it as intended, and I'm coming in with Rose Quartz, which is this really nice pink color, and I'm going to do the same thing on all 3 layers of the petal stencils. So you can see I did a base layer there of the Rose Quartz, and now I have come in with Puffy Heart, which is kind of the next darkest shade of pink, and I've just brought that up a little bit onto each petal. And then for my darkest color here, I'm going to use Cosmic Berry, which is more of a purpley pink. It's really beautiful, and I'm bringing it up from the bottom of the petal and then along the edges of the petal. So I was using a small blending brush, and then for that dark shading I used the detail blending brush. So you can see I did the same thing again for all 3 layers of the floral piece. And now for the leaves, I'm starting out with Mountain Mist. This is a really nice green blue color, and I'm going to do all of the leaves with that. And then same thing, I'm going to come in with a darker tone. I'm using Lagoon here in order to add some shading on the leaves, going around the edges and then also coming up from the base of each of the leaves. So there is the finished stencil. I think it looks so pretty with that added shading. It really just adds a lot. I'm going to cut this down so that I have a full-sized A2 panel that's 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. And I'm going to stamp my sentiment. I'm using a small sentiment because I've got a big floral, I've got several large moths. All I need is a little sentiment, so I'm using Hello There, which is from this set. And then I'm going to pop up my moths with some of the Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape, which you guys see me use all the time. I really love the thickness of this foam tape, and I think it's pretty reasonably priced. So if I haven't mentioned already, I will link below down in the description to everything that I'm using today. So if you see anything that you want to take a closer look at, please do look down in the description and give it a look there. Now that I have all 3 of my moths down, I can go ahead and take my card panel here, and I'm going to glue it to my card base just using some liquid adhesive. Nothing fancy here, but I'm going to show you when I open up my card, I use that little leftover scrap from when I initially cut down the stencil piece, and I put a strip of the stenciled florals on the inside along with a tiny thin strip of that same glitter cardstock that we used with the moths. So it's going to tie in the inside of the card with the outside. It's really pretty. For our second card, I'm going to use the Honeycomb Daisies cover die. This is a very versatile die. I feel like you could use this on pretty much any style of card, and it just adds a lot of interest and detail to your card. So I took an A2 sized card panel. It's 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches, and I ran it through my die cutting machine with that cover plate. Look at all that detail. And now I'm going to put my card base all together before I work on the elements. So you'll see later I go ahead and stencil another one of the floral pieces, but this is the second way that you can use your stenciled images. You can put them in strips on the front of your card. Don't be afraid to cut up your stenciled images. You could do it on half of the front of your card. You could do it on a little bit, like a quarter, like I'm doing here, or you could do it on a large area, like 3/4, but then add some other type of patterned piece. Like here, I've got the cover plate die piece, and you can see it creates a lot of interest on the front of the card. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that cover die piece that we cut out right next to my strip that is the stenciled strip. If you had a full-size panel that had stenciling on it and you cut it in half, and then you also had a cover plate die that you had used, you could cut that in half and then you could get 2-for-1 cards. I love, love, love how easy this technique is. Okay, so the base is all done. Now I'm going to work on my elements. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I want to move on to that third card and show you the third way to use your stenciled images. So for my elements on this second card, I'm going to stamp out those same 3 moths. I'm going to stamp them out in some jet black fresh dye ink. This ink works so well for alcohol marker coloring. So I'm going to come in. I'm not doing anything fancy in terms of shading when it comes to the coloring. I'm just using several different colors in all the different spots of the moths. So I'll list down below in the description what colors I've used. These are Olo alcohol markers. Once those were done, I die cut them out with the coordinating dies, and now I'm going to stamp my sentiment. I just have that one little moth there so I can figure out placement of my sentiment. Again, using a small sentiment. This one says miss you, and again popping up those moths just to give them a little bit of dimension. To add even more sparkle, because I love sparkle, I'm coming in here with my Spectrum Noir sparkle pen. I went over all of the moths as well as the floral. So hopefully you can see that there. It looks really sparkly in real life, but sometimes the camera doesn't always pick it up terribly well. But isn't that fun with all the texture, everything that's on there? I love it. Okay, for our third card, now you see here I stenciled out that whole bloom image again, and now I know there's going to be some of you screaming, no, don't do it, but I am going to cut that piece here with the Honeycomb Daisies cover die. Guys, don't be afraid to cut your stenciled images with cover dies. It creates a really fun, unique, interesting look, and it's not something you see every day on a card. When you're done, you can still see all of the stenciled pattern, but you're going to also have all of that beautiful dimension and texture from the added cover die. It looks so cool. So I'm going to trim the piece down using my mini trimmer, and then I am going to pop it on the front of my A2 size card base, again using some of the foam tape. I just peeled down the backs of the release tape about halfway, then I'm going to center it here on my card, press down, and then I can flip the whole thing over and remove the rest of that release tape. Makes it really easy to line everything up. And you can see there I have my sentiment along with a shadow. I cut out the sentiment in that gorgeous glitter cardstock again, and then I did the shadow in vellum. And I did it in vellum because I didn't want to take away from everything I had going on with our gorgeous background, but I also wanted the sentiment to be able to stand out from that background. So that is a good time to use vellum. It helps to kind of separate the sentiment from what you have going on. Now I've got a few jewels here. I think I put down about 6 of them, and I've put them in 2 sort of triangle formations. That tends to work really well for jewels or sequins. But again, I just wanted to add a little bit more bling to the card. I feel like that tied everything together. So there is the finished third card. I really think this looks so unique and fun. So to recap, you can use your stenciled images as a full background. You can use strips of your stenciled images in different ways on the front of your card, and you can cut your stenciled images with your cover dies. I did want to mention that this video is part of the November 2023 release video hop, so be sure to check down in the description about all of the fun giveaways that are going on with this release. I hope you picked up some tips and tricks today. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as well as hit that notification bell so that I can continue bringing you more crafty content in the future. Until next time, happy crafting!